The morning sun rose lazily over the vast naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, painting long shadows across rows of gleaming aircraft and ships anchored by the pier. The rhythmic clatter of boots on asphalt echoed like a heartbeat of discipline, while the scent of sea salt mingled with engine oil and coffee. Soldiers in crisp uniforms moved briskly between buildings, exchanging salutes and laughter in the routine buzz of military life. Among them walked a woman who didn't quite fit in. She was dressed simply, navy blue trousers, a white blouse, and a light trench coat draped over her shoulders. Her hair was tied back neatly, but not with the strictness of military formality. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her eyes observant, every detail absorbed, the posture of the guards, the tone of the officers, the way some soldiers stood at ease, a bit too casually, when no one was watching. Her name was Elena Brooks. To most of the Navy, that name meant little, not yet. But by the following morning, every person on that base would know it. For she had just been appointed Rear Admiral Elena Brooks, the first woman in the history of this base to hold that title. Her arrival had been kept secret by Central Command, intended as a formal surprise announcement. But Elena had different plans. She believed that a leader's first impression shouldn't come from ceremony. It should come from truth. That morning, she decided to visit the base incognito, without uniform, without fanfare, to see the real culture of the men and women she would soon lead. She wanted to see how they treated strangers, how they respected one another, and how they carried themselves when no rank hovered over them. As she passed the gate, the young sentry barely glanced at her ID card before waving her through. "Visitors pass," he mumbled. No salute, no acknowledgement. Just another civilian entering the base. Elena nodded, noting it quietly. Walking through the training yard, she observed a group of recruits jogging past, chanting in rhythm. Their sergeant barked commands, his voice rough but tired. Not bad, she thought, but their formation was uneven. Too casual, too loose. She wrote that down in the small notebook she carried in her pocket, not to criticize, but to remember. The base was larger than she expected. Sprawling docks, mechanics repairing fighter jets, groups of soldiers laughing near the cafeteria steps, some serious, some careless. She walked slowly, blending into the rhythm of their world. She didn't need to announce who she was. She only needed to listen. Her stomach rumbled faintly. She hadn't eaten since dawn. She followed the sound of chatter toward the mess hall, a two-story building buzzing with life. As she stepped inside, the atmosphere changed instantly, louder, freer, less restrained. Soldiers laughed, slapped each other on the back, and traded jokes that probably wouldn't survive a superior's presence. It was here that the story she'd remember forever would begin. The air was thick with the smell of bacon, burnt toast, and steaming milk. Tables were packed with soldiers, sailors, and engineers eating with the carefree confidence of men who thought no one was watching. Elena picked a quiet corner near the window and ordered a simple cup of tea. She sat down, her gaze sweeping across the room. She noticed small details, uniforms unbuttoned halfway, boots unlaced, a few playing cards hidden beneath trays. The young men laughed, carefree. She didn't judge them. She remembered what it was like to be young in the service. Those long, sleepless nights at sea, the exhaustion, the need to release tension somehow. Still, there was a fine line between relaxation and disregard. At a nearby table, a group of soldiers had already noticed her. "Who's that?" one asked, leaning forward. "No idea," another shrugged. "Maybe some journalist? Or one of the nurses?" "She looks too serious to be a nurse," the third replied, smirking. "Probably some inspector or a commander's wife. Relax, she's harmless." But one of them, Private Daniel Mason, wasn't the type to relax quietly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had that air of arrogant confidence young soldiers often wear before they've seen real battle. He had a reputation for being a prankster, not malicious but reckless. His friends called him the Joker of the barracks. Always laughing, always pushing boundaries. When he noticed Elena sitting alone, his grin widened. "Watch this," he whispered to his buddies. "Oh, don't," one of them warned. "You'll get us all in trouble." "Nah, come on. Just for fun. She's probably just a clerk." Mason stood, stretched his arms dramatically, and walked toward the counter. He filled a cup with steaming hot milk, pretending to yawn. His friends watched, half amused, half horrified. As he passed by Elena's table, he tripped, or so he pretended, and the contents of the cup splashed across her sleeve and chest. The hall went silent for a heartbeat before laughter erupted. "Oops," Mason said loudly, feigning surprise. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Didn't see you there." His grin betrayed the fake apology. "Hope that didn't ruin your day." Elena froze for only a second. Her hand instinctively went to her uniform, wiping the hot liquid away. The burn stung, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes met Mason's. Calm, cold, measuring. The laughter around them grew louder. Mason's friends chuckled nervously, trying to act casual. Then Elena spoke. "It takes more than that to ruin my day, soldier." Her tone was even, not angry, but there was something in it, a quiet authority that cut through the laughter like a blade through glass. The room fell silent. Mason blinked. Right. My bad," he muttered, suddenly unsure. She nodded slightly, took a napkin, and continued sipping her tea as if nothing had happened. The tension lingered in the air. Some soldiers exchanged glances, whispering. "Weird," one said. "Didn't even shout at him." "Yeah," another replied. "Who does that?" Mason laughed again, though this time it sounded forced. "Guess she's tougher than she looks," he said, returning to his table. But even as he laughed, something in his chest tightened. The way she'd looked at him, calm, unshaken, it unsettled him. When Elena finished her tea, she stood, adjusted her sleeve, and walked out of the hall without another word. Outside, the midday sun bathed the base in gold. She paused, looking back at the building. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed, not in Mason alone, but in the culture she had just witnessed. Inside those walls were young men who wore the Navy's uniform, but had forgotten the spirit behind it. She had seen arrogance where there should have been pride, disrespect where there should have been discipline. And she knew what she had to do. By tomorrow morning, everything would change. As she walked toward her quarters, she passed by the dockyard, where the ocean waves slapped gently against the pier. The hum of the base carried on, soldiers shouting, vehicles rumbling, planes roaring overhead. No one paid much attention to the woman strolling among them. But soon they would. That evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, the command office prepared for the next day's ceremony. An announcement had been scheduled for 0900 hours, the introduction of the new Rear Admiral. The base was unaware that she had already arrived, had already seen them unfiltered. Inside her temporary quarters, Elena hung her damp blouse and sat by the window, the ocean wind brushing through her hair. She thought about Mason, his smug face, the laughter of his friends, the lack of accountability. Tomorrow, she wouldn't need to raise her voice. Tomorrow, respect would no longer be a request. It would be a revelation. The next morning, the naval base stirred to life with the familiar hum of drills, shouted orders, and the steady clank of boots on asphalt. Soldiers moved in precise formations, their faces reflecting the discipline drilled into them over years of service. But among the young faces, there was one that carried a lingering unease. Private Daniel Mason. He had spent the night replaying the previous day's incident in the mess hall over and over again. At first, he had laughed along with his friends, feeling the thrill of a harmless prank. But something about the woman's calmness, her unflinching gaze, and her quiet words had gnawed at him like a persistent tide. It was unsettling. It was unnerving. And worst of all, it was real. Mason rubbed his eyes as he prepared his uniform. The scuffed boots, the neatly ironed trousers, and the pressed jacket, all were standard. Yet for the first time, he noticed the symbolism behind them. The uniform wasn't just fabric. It was a badge of responsibility, a mantle of trust. He had worn it carelessly before, flaunting humor where seriousness was demanded, never realizing that respect could not be faked. By the time he arrived at the mess hall, the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off metal trays and reflecting on polished floors. Soldiers were bustling around, serving breakfast, chatting in groups, and sharing quiet jokes. Mason's friends nudged him, whispering, "Forget about her. She's just some visitor." Yeah, Mason muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Inside, the same mess hall from yesterday seemed different. Today, it carried a subtle tension he hadn't noticed before. The way some soldiers straightened their posture when an officer passed, the faint hush when someone dropped a tray. And there she was, Elena Brooks, sitting quietly at the same corner table. Her presence was understated but undeniable, her posture erect, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that seemed to quiet the chaos around her. Mason's first instinct was to joke again, to shake off the lingering discomfort with another prank. He glanced at his friends, who raised eyebrows in warning. But the mischief in him was hard to resist. He smirked, telling himself, "It's just a bit of fun. Nothing serious." He grabbed a cup of steaming milk from the counter, feeling the warmth through the thin paper. The thought of spilling it on her made him chuckle under his breath. "She won't even notice," he whispered to himself. But deep down, a small voice nagged at him, whispering caution. As he stepped toward her table, weaving between soldiers and trays, he tried to appear casual. Then, with an exaggerated stumble, he tilted the cup. Steam rose like a ghost over the rim before the hot milk splashed across her sleeve and chest. A heartbeat of silence hung in the air. Then laughter erupted, raucous, almost mocking. Mason's friends guffawed, slapping him on the back. "Got her. Nice one." Elena didn't flinch. She raised a napkin calmly, dabbed the milk off her sleeve, and looked him squarely in the eyes. "It takes more than that to ruin my day, soldier," she said softly, her voice a smooth blade cutting through the chaos. Mason froze, the heat of embarrassment rising faster than the milk had burned her uniform. The laughter around him faltered. Some soldiers glanced nervously at each other, sensing something in her tone they couldn't name. Sorry," he mumbled, his bravado cracking. "I didn't mean." Elena nodded slightly, finishing her tea with deliberate slowness. She didn't yell. She didn't demand apologies. She simply exuded authority, showing him, and everyone else, that strength didn't always need to roar. Mason stepped back, unsure what to do with himself. He had expected anger, maybe a scolding, but not this quiet, calm confrontation. There was no drama, no spectacle, just an unshakable presence. As Elena rose from the table and walked out, Mason's friends tried to laugh again, but it sounded hollow. Even they were aware of the shift, subtle yet undeniable. Mason's chest tightened. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions not as a joke, but as a breach of decorum, a moment of disrespect he couldn't easily undo. Throughout the morning, whispers spread across the base. Soldiers recounted what had happened with astonishment. "Did you see how she reacted?" One said. "She didn't even yell." She's scary," another replied. In a quiet way, Mason couldn't shake the memory. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her sitting there, serene, composed, and utterly unfazed by his antics. He realized, with growing discomfort, that he had misjudged her completely. Meanwhile, Elena walked the base's outer docks, observing quietly. Her eyes scanned the sailors performing routine inspections, the young recruits struggling with knots, and officers reviewing paperwork. She didn't rush. She didn't interfere. She was gathering information, taking mental notes, learning the rhythm and behavior of her future command. Her mind replayed the mess hall. Mason's carelessness had revealed more than his personality. It had revealed a culture of casual disrespect, of young men testing boundaries because they believed no one powerful was watching. Elena understood that changing this culture would require more than speeches. It would require lessons that were fair, firm, and unforgettable. By late morning, Mason had returned to his duties, but he moved differently. His usual swagger was tempered by a strange self-consciousness. For the first time, he noticed minor infractions. A recruit leaving a towel on the deck, a sailor speaking out of turn. The uniform he had treated so casually suddenly felt heavier, like a mantle he wasn't yet ready to carry. Elena, observing from a distance, noted these subtle changes. The smallest acts, hesitation corrected, glances exchanged, told her as much as any formal report could. She was satisfied. Her presence alone, unseen and unannounced, had already begun to ripple through the base. By afternoon, the mess hall incident had spread across the base like wildfire. Soldiers whispered to each other, some laughing nervously, some reflecting quietly. Mason tried to laugh along, but he felt an unfamiliar tension, a strange awareness that his behavior had consequences beyond immediate laughter. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the docks in hues of orange and gold, Mason sat alone on a bench, replaying the events. He touched his uniform absent-mindedly, feeling its weight differently than before. He realized that he had mocked not just a stranger, but authority itself, a truth he could not escape. And somewhere across the base, Elena looked out over the water, thinking ahead. Tomorrow, she would formally introduce herself. The lessons she intended to teach would not be through anger or punishment, but through clarity, fairness, and undeniable presence. For Mason, the quiet, composed woman he had spilled milk upon would become the measure of all authority he would encounter in his career. And for the rest of the base, the ripple of this single act, so seemingly trivial, yet so revealing, would change the way they understood respect, discipline, and leadership. In that moment, the incident that began as a prank became a catalyst for transformation, not just for Mason, but for the entire base. And Elena Brooks, without a single raised voice, had already begun to command their attention. The base had settled into its late afternoon rhythm, a momentary lull between the morning drills and the evening inspections. The air carried the faint scent of oil, salt, and the last traces of breakfast lingering on the mess hall floors. Soldiers lounged in shaded courtyards, traded small jokes, and repaired gear with an easy familiarity. But beneath the routine, a subtle tension vibrated like an undercurrent, invisible yet palpable. At the center of this current was Pilot Daniel Mason. He had spent the better part of the morning replaying the previous day's incident with unnerving clarity. Every detail haunted him, the soft chime of laughter in the mess hall, the way her eyes had locked onto his, the deliberate calm of her voice when she had said, "It takes more than that to ruin my day, soldier." What had once seemed a harmless prank now revealed itself as an act of carelessness that reflected his immaturity and lack of foresight. Mason moved with his usual swagger, but it was hollow. He forced small smiles at his friends' attempts at teasing him, but the laughter rang false, even in his own ears. Their carefree banter about the milk incident now felt like a cruel echo, reminding him that he had underestimated someone he barely knew. Man, she wasn't angry, Mason muttered to himself, brushing a hand over his uniform jacket. And she wasn't afraid of me either. Who isn't afraid of a guy like me? His friends shot him uneasy looks. One nudged him and whispered, "Maybe lay low for a while, man. You don't want to get her mad." Mason nodded, but inwardly he knew this wasn't just about avoiding anger. This was about respect, something he realized he had never truly understood. The woman he had humiliated had revealed, without a word of punishment, a standard he couldn't yet measure up to. Meanwhile, Elena Brooks walked alone along the edge of the dockyard. The late afternoon sun sparkled on the water, reflecting the silhouettes of ships and cranes. Her presence went unnoticed by most, yet she was acutely aware of every movement around her. Soldiers lifting supplies, officers reviewing logs, young recruits fumbling with knots. Every detail was a note in the symphony of her observation, every misstep a data point for the lesson she would teach. She thought about Mason, the young soldier whose impulsive prank had revealed far more than a simple lapse in judgment. It was a microcosm of the culture she had come to correct: rash humor, thoughtless disrespect, and a lack of mindfulness in those entrusted with responsibility. It wasn't personal, not exactly. It was institutional, and yet it began with one man's careless act. Elena's gaze swept across the dockyard, lingering on Mason as he talked quietly with his peers, fidgeting, unconsciously straightening his uniform, attempting to appear composed. She made a mental note. He's aware, but unaware. He sees now, but he doesn't yet understand. That will come. Across the base, whispers about the incident had grown into quiet rumors. Soldiers discussed the woman with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She didn't yell, didn't get angry, one said, shaking his head. And she looked in control, like she could see everything. She's probably some commander in training, another guessed. But even so, something about her is different. These whispers spread quietly, like sparks in dry grass, reaching ears that were both intrigued and intimidated. Mason overheard a few of them as he walked past a group of young recruits, laughing nervously. The weight of their observations pressed on him, heavier than any reprimand could. By late afternoon, Mason found a secluded spot behind a stack of crates, away from the bustle of his peers. He sank down, staring at his polished boots. The warm milk incident, which had seemed trivial in the moment, had transformed into a catalyst for self-reflection. He realized, painfully, that his behavior had not only embarrassed him, but also signaled a deeper lack of discipline. His thoughts wandered. What kind of leader would she be? He couldn't imagine anyone with such composure reacting with anger or vengeance. She didn't need theatrics. She didn't need to raise her voice. And that realization unsettled him even further. She doesn't just command obedience. She commands respect, and I haven't earned it. Elena returned to the administrative quarters as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the base in warm oranges and soft purples. The base's hum softened, but the tension lingered. Soldiers moved quietly now, checking logs, cleaning equipment, and preparing for the next day's drills. The prank in the mess hall had shifted something intangible, a subtle recalibration of awareness and behavior. Inside her temporary office, Elena unfolded a detailed base map, placing mental markers on areas she had observed that day. The mess hall was first, naturally. Then the training yard, the docks, the officers' quarters, and the barracks. Each location represented an opportunity to understand the culture and dynamics she would inherit. She made notes of behaviors, patterns, and potential weak points, each observation catalogued for the lessons ahead. But even as she strategized, her thoughts returned to Mason. She wasn't angry. Not at him, not truly. Instead, She felt anticipation, a sense of possibility. The boy had potential, if only it could be directed. She intended to teach him that leadership wasn't a position earned through tricks or bravado, but through accountability, discipline, and self-awareness. Back in the barracks, Mason lay awake in the quiet darkness. The events of the day and the anticipation of tomorrow churned in his mind. He replayed the moment the milk had spilled, the way she had looked at him without a hint of fury, and the calm finality of her words. He thought about respect and how he had misunderstood it. Tomorrow, he realized, I'll see her again. And I have no idea what to expect. The sun had set fully now, and the base was bathed in the soft glow of floodlights. Officers conducted their rounds, ensuring the men were prepared for inspection, while Elena reviewed her notes in the privacy of her quarters. The calm before the storm had settled in, quiet, deceptive, but pregnant with the promise of revelation. For Mason, the weight of the upcoming day pressed down on his chest. For the base, the presence of a woman poised to challenge norms and expectations loomed like a silent wave. And for Elena Brooks, the calm was a necessary precursor, a moment to observe, plan, and prepare for the introduction that would forever alter the rhythm of life at this naval base. That night, as Mason drifted into uneasy sleep, the milk-stained shirt and his humiliation lingered in memory. But beneath the shame was a spark of realization, the first flicker of understanding that discipline and respect were not abstract concepts, nor simple rules. They were the foundation of everything he had been entrusted to protect, and the lessons of tomorrow would ensure he could never ignore them again. By the first light of dawn, the whispers of the previous day had transformed into quiet expectations. Soldiers wondered, speculated, and imagined what kind of leader would soon step into their world. And all the while, Elena Brooks slept only lightly, preparing herself for a moment she knew would redefine everything, for Mason, for the base, and for the culture she had been entrusted to guide. The morning air was sharp with the scent of the sea as the base stirred to life. Soldiers lined up across the main courtyard in crisp formation, boots tapping rhythmically against the asphalt. The sun glinted off polished brass buttons and medals, while the distant clang of ship bells echoed faintly from the docks. A sense of expectancy hung over the assembly. Rumors had spread that a significant announcement was coming. Whispers darted across the ranks like sparks in dry grass. Private Daniel Mason shifted nervously in his spot, boots planted firmly on the asphalt. He had spent the night replaying the milk incident again and again, the memory of her calm composure haunting him. Even now, he could feel the burn of embarrassment, the unease of having been seen for the fool he had been. His friends tried to joke, nudging him with light-hearted quips. "Relax, Mason," one whispered. "She's probably not even showing up." Mason shook his head, unable to return the levity. He knew better. Something deep inside told him this was no ordinary visit. He could feel her presence before she even arrived. A weight, an authority he hadn't yet encountered, quietly pressing down on his conscience. The base commander, an older man with decades of experience, stepped forward onto the raised platform at the center of the courtyard. His uniform was immaculate, medals catching the light with every slight movement. He cleared his throat, and the courtyard fell silent, the soldiers' whispers dying instantly under the weight of authority. "Attention!" he barked. The lines of soldiers stiffened, standing taller. "Today, we welcome a new leader to our base. Someone who will not only command your respect, but also guide your discipline. She has already shown remarkable leadership and dedication to the Navy." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Mason's heart thudded painfully against his chest. He scanned the crowd, searching for a clue, for some sign of who this might be. But the platform remained empty, the soldiers restless with anticipation. Then, from the far end of the courtyard, a hush swept through the assembly as a figure emerged. The sunlight caught the sharp lines of her uniform, glinting off the polished insignia that marked her rank. Boots clicked against the asphalt in precise, measured steps, each one echoing across the courtyard. It was Elena Brooks. The soldiers collectively gasped. The same woman from the mess hall, the one who had endured Mason's careless prank with calm authority, now stood before them in full regalia, medals shining, hair perfectly secured, and eyes scanning the formation with quiet command. She didn't need to speak yet. Her presence alone spoke volumes. Mason froze. His jaw went dry, and his stomach dropped. He recognized her instantly. The woman he had humiliated, the woman whose composure had unnerved him, was the new Rear Admiral of the base. He had laughed at her yesterday, unaware of her rank. Now he stood paralyzed, the full weight of his actions settling over him like a storm. Elena reached the podium with deliberate steps. She straightened, adjusted her gloves, and surveyed the crowd. The chatter ceased entirely. Every eye was on her, soldiers, officers, and recruits alike. She exuded an authority that was calm yet unyielding, the kind that made even seasoned veterans sit up straighter. "Good morning, sailors," she began, her voice measured but carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I am Rear Admiral Elena Brooks. As of today, I have the honor of commanding this base and guiding each of you in your duties." A wave of murmurs swept through the soldiers. Some whispered to one another, incredulous that the woman they had seen quietly drinking tea and enduring a prank yesterday was now their superior. Others exchanged glances, realizing that the informal jokes and careless behavior of the previous day might not go unnoticed after all. Elena paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. Her eyes landed on Mason almost immediately. The young soldier's face flushed crimson under her steady stare. She didn't smile, didn't scold, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him with calm, unwavering scrutiny. "Respect," she continued, her tone soft but incisive, "is not something you demand. It is something revealed by behavior when you think no one is watching. Yesterday, I had the privilege of observing some of you in your natural state, unguarded, unrestrained. Some of what I saw concerned me." Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Mason's heart pounded as he realized she was referring to him and the mess hall incident. The prank that had once seemed harmless now felt like a mountain pressing down on him. "I believe that leadership is reflected not by rank or title, but by accountability, humility, and the ability to learn from mistakes," she continued. Her eyes scanned the crowd again, lingering briefly on Mason. "Those who fail to demonstrate these qualities will have the opportunity to learn them, whether they like it or not." The courtyard fell silent, the weight of her words sinking into every soldier present. Some looked down at their boots, others straightened involuntarily, and Mason's hands twitched at his sides. He felt a mixture of fear and awe, the first real awareness of what authority could look like when exercised with calm precision. She paused, letting the silence resonate, and spoke directly to Mason, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Private Mason, step forward." Mason's legs felt like lead. He moved hesitantly, conscious of every step, aware of every eye in the formation. The crowd fell completely silent, the air thick with anticipation. Mason's friends tried to offer nervous smiles, but even they were frozen by the gravity of the moment. He reached the platform and stood rigidly, eyes cast downward, awaiting the Admiral's judgment. But instead of anger, there was nothing but measured calm. "You have already shown me that carelessness has consequences," Elena said quietly, her gaze piercing. "But I do not believe in punishment for its own sake. I believe in opportunity, the opportunity to learn, grow, and rise to the standard expected of a sailor in this base." The soldiers collectively exhaled, some in relief, some in disbelief. Mason swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he absorbed her words. "You will serve under my direct supervision for a period of training, to develop discipline and leadership," she continued, her voice firm but fair. "I expect full commitment. If you succeed, you will emerge a better sailor. If you fail, you will reflect on the choices that brought you here." Mason nodded silently. He understood. The prank, the embarrassment, the failure. It was not the end. It was a beginning. A chance to change. To grow. To learn what it truly meant to earn respect. Elena straightened, her presence dominating the courtyard, without a word of threat or anger. "Let this assembly serve as a reminder," she concluded, "that every action has consequence, and every choice reflects your character. Wear your uniform not just as fabric, but as a symbol of your honor." The soldiers erupted into muted applause, some hesitant, some sincere. Mason's chest tightened with newfound resolve. The woman who had been the object of his prank was now his teacher, his guide, and his measure of discipline. As she stepped down from the podium, the murmurs turned into whispers of awe. Soldiers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that the base had changed overnight. The woman who had quietly endured an insult had now established herself as a leader whose authority could not be ignored or questioned. Mason returned to his position, eyes cast downward, heart pounding. He understood the road ahead would not be easy. The lessons had only begun, and the challenge of earning the Rear Admiral's respect was just the first step. Elena stood for a moment, surveying the assembly, before walking calmly toward the edge of the courtyard. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and full of authority. The soldiers watched, knowing without question that this was a leader who commanded not by intimidation, but by the sheer weight of presence and principle. The day had begun with a prank, but it would be remembered as the day the base truly learned the meaning of respect, discipline, and leadership. For Mason, the path forward had been set, and he would walk it under the eyes of a woman who had already taught him more with silence and composure than he had learned in all his training. The base would never forget the moment Rear Admiral Elena Brooks stepped into the courtyard. Neither would Mason. The courtyard was still buzzing with the afterglow of Elena Brooks' grand introduction, yet an invisible tension lingered in the air. Soldiers stood straighter now, each one subtly aware of the weight that authority could carry without the need for raised voices or overt threats. Every eye seemed to linger on Mason, who shifted uneasily, boots scuffing against the asphalt as if trying to erase the memory of his humiliation. He knew that the incident from yesterday had escalated far beyond the joke he had intended. The steaming milk on her sleeve, once a laughable prank, had become a symbol of careless disrespect. And the woman who had endured it so calmly was no ordinary figure. She was the Rear Admiral, the highest authority he would answer to. Elena stepped forward again, her polished boots echoing across the courtyard with the precision of someone used to commanding attention. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled soldiers. Each face mirrored a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and respect. Her eyes found Mason almost immediately, piercing him with a steady intensity that left him unable to meet her gaze for long. "Private Mason," she began, her tone calm yet cutting through the air like steel. "Step forward." Mason's legs felt heavy, weighed down by nerves, shame, and anticipation. He walked toward her, each step measured, aware of every soldier watching, every judgment forming silently around him. His palms were clammy, his uniform suddenly heavy with responsibility. The playful arrogance he had worn like armor yesterday had dissolved entirely, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He reached the platform and saluted, though his hands trembled slightly. Elena nodded at the gesture, accepting it but not acknowledging it with words. Instead, she spoke directly to him, her voice low, precise, and unwavering. "Yesterday, You made a choice to act carelessly, to prioritize amusement over respect, to test boundaries without understanding consequences. In doing so, you demonstrated not only your behavior, but the culture of thoughtlessness present in this base. Tell me, Private Mason, do you understand what respect truly means? Mason swallowed hard. The words felt heavier than any reprimand he had received in his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came at first. His mind raced, replaying every detail of the mess hall incident, the way her eyes had met his, the way she had remained unshaken, the calm authority that had silenced laughter without raising a finger. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, ma'am. I think I understand, ma'am. Elena's gaze did not waver. Think or no? She asked. The question struck deeper than any scolding. Mason's stomach twisted. He realized that he had assumed understanding was simple, that a single apology or a polite gesture could erase the weight of his actions. But Elena had shown him that true understanding required reflection, accountability, and growth. I want to understand, ma'am, he admitted, his voice firmer now. I see that what I did was wrong. I want to learn. A small nod from Elena, not of concession, but of recognition. She was not rewarding him. She was acknowledging the beginning of his awareness. Very well, she continued, her voice projecting across the courtyard so everyone could hear. I do not believe in punishment for humiliation alone. Mistakes are opportunities to learn, grow, and demonstrate character. Therefore, you will serve under my direct supervision for a period of training. During this time, you will engage in duties that will teach you discipline, accountability, and the standards expected of all sailors. The soldiers around them leaned in slightly, captivated by her words. There was no theatrics, no exaggerated threats. Her authority was inherent, unshakable, and deeply transformative. Mason felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by the weight of responsibility. This was not a reward. It was a challenge, one he could not escape. He nodded firmly, understanding that his future conduct, not his past actions, would define him. Elena's eyes scanned the crowd once more. I expect full engagement. I expect reflection. And I expect progress. The lessons you will learn under my supervision are not easy. They are not comfortable, but they are necessary. And Private Mason, let this be a lesson to all here. Respect is not given. It is earned through consistent behavior, humility, and accountability. The courtyard remained silent for a heartbeat longer, as if absorbing the gravity of her message. Soldiers shifted in their positions, some quietly reflecting on their own actions and attitudes. Mason felt a transformation beginning inside him, a mix of fear, respect, and determination. Elena continued, softer now, almost conversational. Mason, you will begin tomorrow. You will report directly to me and follow every instruction diligently. Your task is not to prove your cleverness or your humor. Your task is to understand the meaning of service, responsibility, and honor. Failure to learn these lessons will not be tolerated. But success will define your path in ways your jest never could. Mason's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For the first time, he felt the full weight of accountability. Every prank, every careless action, every moment of arrogance he had carried now felt like a lesson waiting to be learned. And Elena Brooks was the teacher who would guide him through it. The soldiers around him exhaled quietly. Some were relieved that Mason was not being humiliated publicly. Others were inspired, recognizing that discipline did not always need to be loud, aggressive, or punitive. Respect could be commanded quietly, through presence, integrity, and fair but firm guidance. Mason straightened, a fire of resolve igniting within him. He had always believed he was clever, untouchable, a master of mischief. Now, standing before Elena Brooks, he understood that cleverness meant nothing without discipline, that jokes carried consequences, and that leadership was measured by accountability. Elena studied him for another long moment. "You will have every opportunity to prove yourself, Mason. Do not waste it." Her eyes softened slightly, not in sympathy, but in the quiet acknowledgement that he had begun the first step of transformation. Mason nodded again, silently vowing that he would not squander the lesson. The Rear Admiral stepped down from the platform, signaling the end of the formal address, yet the lesson lingered in the air. Every soldier who had witnessed the interaction felt the shift, a recalibration of what it meant to serve, to lead, and to honor the uniform. As Mason returned to his position, he felt something he had never experienced before, a profound sense of purpose. The embarrassment, the shame, the hot milk, all of it was now part of a larger journey. He understood that true leadership, true respect, and true discipline were not granted through laughter or fear, but through deliberate choice, reflection, and action. The day continued with routine drills, but for Mason and for the base, nothing would ever be the same. The moment of reckoning had passed, leaving in its wake a lesson far more powerful than any scolding, a challenge far more meaningful than any punishment. And at the center of it all was Elena Brooks, whose quiet authority had already begun to transform a soldier, and through him, the culture of the base itself. That evening, Mason sat in the barracks, reflecting on every word, every glance, every pause from the Rear Admiral. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of character, and new opportunities to demonstrate growth. For the first time in his career, he felt the weight and meaning of his responsibilities, and a determination to meet them with sincerity, discipline, and respect. The moment of reckoning had not ended, it had only begun. The morning fog rolled over the naval base, wrapping the docks and training yards in a muted gray haze. The smell of salt water mingled with the metallic tang of machinery, and the distant hum of engines provided a steady, rhythmic backdrop. For most soldiers, it was just another day of routine drills. For Private Daniel Mason, however, it was a day that would test every ounce of discipline, patience, and resolve he had been cultivating under Rear Admiral Elena Brooks. Since the incident in the mess hall, Mason had undergone rigorous training, both physical and mental. He had been challenged to take responsibility for small tasks, to observe and correct mistakes in himself and others, and to internal, you said, continue part 6, 1200 words. ChatGPT said, perfect. Let's continue with part 6, the consequences and transformation in a fully cinematic, third-person narrative, around 1200 words. This part will focus on Mason's direct training under Admiral Brooks, his early struggles, and the beginnings of his transformation. Part 6, the consequences and transformation. The morning sun had barely risen above the horizon, casting a pale gold over the sprawling naval base. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby docks and the faint aroma of fresh coffee from the mess hall. Private Daniel Mason had been awake long before the first alarms, his thoughts racing with anticipation, anxiety, and the lingering memory of the previous week's incident. Today was not just another day on the base. Today, Mason would begin direct training under Rear Admiral Elena Brooks. The very thought tightened his chest. He had spent the previous days reflecting on her words, replaying her calm authority in the mess hall, and acknowledging the embarrassment he had caused himself and his peers. Now, he was to prove that he could transform that awareness into tangible change. As he stepped onto the training yard, the base seemed different. The sun glinted off the steel rails of the nearby ships, the hum of machinery seemed sharper, and every movement, from soldiers lifting crates to officers reviewing schedules, carried a newfound weight in his perception. It was as if the world itself had grown more precise, more exacting. "Private Mason," a calm yet commanding voice called. He turned sharply to see Rear Admiral Brooks standing near the edge of the yard, her posture perfect, her uniform immaculate. Even in the harsh morning light, her presence seemed to cast a shadow that drew all attention. Mason felt the familiar pang of respect mixed with trepidation. "Yes, ma'am," he said, snapping to attention. "Follow me," she instructed. Mason hesitated only a moment before moving, aware that every step he took would be observed. The first task was deceptively simple. Elena led him to a small section of the docks where equipment was stored, ropes, nets, and crates stacked in uneven piles. She pointed to a disorganized heap. "Organize this properly. By the end of the hour, I want it inspected and flawless." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Flawless, ma'am?" "Flawless," she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Attention to detail matters. Discipline is reflected in the smallest actions. Every knot, every placement, every gesture counts." The initial excitement he had felt about the training quickly gave way to frustration. The ropes were tangled, the crates heavy, and the wind made balancing them a challenge. Mason realized that he had never truly paid attention to the mundane details of naval work. Each misstep felt amplified under Elena's scrutiny, her eyes silently noting every mistake. Hours passed. Mason's muscles ached, his uniform was stained with sweat and dust, and his confidence wavered. But Elena did not scold him, nor did she rush to correct him. Instead, she observed silently, occasionally offering brief guidance. "Your angle is wrong. Check the alignment again. Notice the tension in the rope before tying the knot." Her words were minimal, but precise. Mason began to notice patterns, the importance of methodical repetition, the subtle power in attentiveness, and the discipline required to maintain focus even when fatigue set in. Each correction, though small, became a lesson etched into his consciousness. By midday, the once chaotic pile of equipment had been transformed into a neatly stacked, perfectly aligned system. Mason stepped back, breathing heavily, and waited for Elena's inspection. She circled the arrangement, her eyes scanning every detail. "Better," she said finally, her voice even. "Not perfect, but much improved. You are beginning to see the connection between effort and result." Mason nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. He realized that transformation was not instantaneous. It required patience, humility, and consistent effort. For the first time, he understood that discipline was not punishment, but a path to mastery. The next challenge came in the form of drill coordination. Elena instructed Mason to oversee a small team of recruits during routine exercises. He felt his heart race. Leadership in practice was far more challenging than theory. The recruits, young and eager, mirrored his previous impatience and impulsiveness. Mason had to suppress his old habits of sarcasm and impulsive humor, instead guiding them with clear, measured instructions. Mistakes were frequent. One recruit tied a knot incorrectly, another stepped out of formation, and a third fumbled with equipment. Mason felt frustration rise, the familiar irritation that would have once prompted sarcastic remarks. But he remembered Elena's calm composure from the mess hall, and he forced himself to breathe, correct gently, and demonstrate patience. "Slowly," he instructed. "Focus on each step. Precision matters more than speed." As the drills progressed, Mason noticed subtle shifts. Recruits began to listen, follow instructions, and respond with attention. For the first time, he experienced the satisfaction of constructive leadership, of influencing others positively through diligence and focus, rather than dominance or humor. By late afternoon, Mason was exhausted. Muscles burned, mind whirred with concentration, but the transformation taking root inside him was undeniable. He felt a pride he had never known before, not the pride of a prank well executed or a joke well timed, but the quiet, steady pride of accomplishment, earned through effort, discipline, and responsibility. Elena observed him once more as he returned the recruits to their quarters. "You are learning," she said. "But remember, this is only the beginning. Transformation is a process, not a single act. The lessons of discipline, respect, and accountability must be applied consistently. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Mason replied, his voice steady. He felt a newfound determination, the kind that could withstand fatigue, failure, and doubt. Elena nodded, satisfied. "Good. Tomorrow, you will face new challenges, not easier ones. But you will be ready if you apply what you have learned today. Remember, leadership is reflected in the small details, in the decisions made when no one is watching, and in the way you conduct yourself when you are tested." As Mason prepared to leave the training yard, he paused and looked back. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the base, illuminating the ships and equipment in a golden glow. He realized that he had changed, not dramatically, but in subtle, meaningful ways. The arrogance that had once defined him was replaced by focus, the impulsiveness by patience, the casual humor by thoughtful reflection. He understood now that the consequences of his actions were not simply punitive, but transformative. The milk incident, his embarrassment, and the rigorous training under Rear Admiral Brooks had ignited a process within him, a journey from carelessness to accountability, from impulsiveness to discipline. That evening, Mason lay in his bunk, muscles aching, uniform damp with sweat, and reflected on the day. He thought about Elena Brooks, her calm authority, her unwavering presence, and her ability to teach without anger or humiliation. He realized that leadership was not about who laughed the loudest, who played the cleverest prank, or who commanded attention through fear. Leadership was about presence, integrity, and the quiet power of consistency. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new lessons, new challenges, and further tests of his resolve. But for the first time, he felt ready to face the consequences, embrace the transformation, and prove that he could become the sailor and the person that Rear Admiral Elena Brooks had envisioned. The day had begun with embarrassment and mischief. It ended with growth, understanding, and a quiet, steadfast resolve. Mason closed his eyes, the weight of the day settling over him like a mantle he was finally prepared to bear. The morning fog rolled over the naval base, wrapping the docks and training yards in a muted gray haze. The smell of salt water mingled with the metallic tang of machinery, and the distant hum of engines provided a steady, rhythmic backdrop. For most soldiers, it was just another day of routine drills. For Private Daniel Mason, however, it was a day that would test every ounce of discipline, patience, and resolve he had been cultivating under Rear Admiral Elena Brooks. Since the incident in the mess hall, Mason had undergone rigorous training, both physical and mental. He had been challenged to take responsibility for small tasks, to observe and correct mistakes in himself and others, and to internalize the meaning of leadership beyond rank. The hours of reflection, repetition, and guidance had begun to strip away his old arrogance and impulsiveness, replacing them with a measured focus and an awareness of the consequences of his actions. Elena Brooks had summoned him early that morning, her tone calm but unmistakably serious. "Today, Mason, you will face a test, a practical exercise that requires not only skill and attention, but composure under pressure. You will be evaluated on your ability to lead, adapt, and maintain discipline. This will be the truest measure of your growth." Mason felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had prepared for challenges, drills, and repetitive tasks, but the idea of being tested in front of peers and officers made his stomach knot. Yet beneath the anxiety, a spark of determination burned. He would prove to himself and to Rear Admiral Brooks that he had begun to change. The exercise began in the training yard, where a simulated crisis had been staged. A small team of recruits was assigned to perform a series of tasks, including organizing supplies, securing equipment, and responding to hypothetical emergencies. Mason's role was to coordinate, oversee, and ensure that every action was performed with precision and efficiency. At first, everything seemed manageable. Mason directed the recruits methodically, guiding their actions with measured instructions and corrections. Yet, as the exercise progressed, unexpected complications arose. A crate toppled, scattering supplies across the yard. A rope snapped during a simulated knot-tying task. And one recruit panicked, fumbling with equipment while shouting for guidance. Mason's first instinct, the old instinct, was frustration, the familiar urge to snap, laugh, or correct harshly. But he stopped himself, remembering the calm authority of Elena Brooks and the lessons of the past weeks. He inhaled deeply, assessing the situation with careful precision. "Focus," he instructed, voice firm but calm. "One step at a time. Check your work, support each other, and communicate clearly." The recruits hesitated, uncertain, but Mason's steady demeanor had an immediate effect. Slowly, they began to follow his guidance, correcting mistakes without panic and performing tasks with newfound precision. Mason realized that true leadership was not about asserting dominance or demanding obedience. It was about instilling confidence, maintaining composure, and fostering accountability. As the exercise continued, Elena Brooks observed from a distance, her eyes sharp and analytical. She noted Mason's progress, the subtle shifts in his approach, and the way he balanced authority with patience. Every decision he made, every correction he offered, and every moment of composure was being catalogued, assessed, and evaluated. The final stage of the exercise was the most demanding. A simulated emergency required Mason and his team to secure a critical area while responding to a cascading series of failures, equipment malfunction, miscommunication, and time constraints. Panic rippled through the recruits, but Mason held his ground. "Prioritize," he barked calmly. "Check your equipment. Cover your sectors. Communicate clearly. Move with purpose, not haste." Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat dripped from Mason's brow, muscles ached, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Yet he did not falter. He adapted to each challenge, reassessed priorities, and coordinated the team with a blend of precision and patience that he had never possessed before. Finally, as the simulated crisis concluded, the recruits stood aligned, equipment secured, and tasks completed with remarkable accuracy. Mason exhaled, his chest heaving, and looked toward Elena Brooks. She approached silently, her eyes scanning the results of the exercise with meticulous attention. "Private Mason," she said, voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. "You have demonstrated composure, adaptability, and leadership under pressure. Your growth is evident, and your ability to apply lessons from previous mistakes has been impressive. This exercise was not merely about completing tasks, it was about proving your character. And you have done so." Mason felt a surge of relief and pride, yet it was tempered by humility. He realized that this acknowledgement was not an endpoint, but a milestone, a recognition of progress, and a reminder that leadership was a continual journey of learning, reflection, and accountability. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, voice steady. I understand that there is still more to learn, and I'm ready for it." Elena nodded, a faint expression of approval crossing her face. "Good. Growth is a continuous process. Today you proved that you can adapt under pressure, guide others, and maintain composure. Remember, the lessons of leadership extend beyond the yard and the base. They apply to every action, every decision, and every interaction you have from this day forward." As the sun began to climb higher, casting sharp shadows across the training yard. Mason felt a profound sense of transformation. The milk incident, the embarrassment, and the rigorous training were no longer just memories. They had become the foundation of his growth. He understood that true leadership required constant vigilance, self-reflection, and the ability to guide others with integrity and composure. The recruits, inspired by Mason's example, approached him with renewed respect. For the first time, he felt the weight and responsibility of influence, the power to shape behavior, instill discipline, and foster accountability. And he embraced it fully, knowing that his journey had only begun. Elena Brooks watched silently, satisfied. She had not needed to raise her voice, scold him publicly, or enforce discipline through fear. Instead, she had taught him through challenge, observation, and opportunity. Mason had met the test of resolve, and in doing so, had taken a crucial step toward becoming the sailor and the leader he had once mocked himself into underestimating. By evening, as Mason returned to the barracks, exhaustion mingled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The muscles in his body ached, and his mind whirred with the day's lessons. Yet he felt a clarity he had never known before. Leadership, respect, and discipline were no longer abstract concepts. They were tangible, earned through effort, reflection, and the courage to confront one's mistakes. The day had been grueling, the challenges relentless, but Mason knew that he had begun to transform. The Rear Admiral had set the standard, and he had met it, not perfectly, but with sincerity, focus, and determination. The road ahead would be long, filled with further tests and opportunities to grow, but he was no longer the careless prankster who had splashed hot milk on her in the mess hall. He had become something more, a sailor learning the true meaning of service, accountability, and leadership under the watchful guidance of Rear Admiral Elena Brooks. And as the fog lifted from the base that evening, revealing the sprawling docks and glinting ships, Mason felt, for the first time, that he was truly ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The naval base was bathed in the soft, golden light of the late afternoon sun, the warmth contrasting with the crisp, cool air drifting in from the sea. The sounds of ships creaking against their moorings and the distant call of seagulls created a rhythm that spoke of both routine and readiness. For most soldiers, it was just another day of drills, inspections, and tasks. For Private Daniel Mason, however, it was a day that marked the culmination of weeks of transformation. A moment that would forever define his understanding of respect, leadership, and accountability. The morning had begun like any other since the milk incident, with Mason rising before dawn, muscles sore from rigorous exercises, and mind sharpened by relentless training under Rear Admiral Elena Brooks. Yet, unlike before, he approached the day with a sense of purpose rather than dread. The lessons he had learned, patience, discipline, composure under pressure, had begun to crystallize into instinct, guiding his actions before he even considered them. Elena had called him to the training yard early, a faint smile on her face betraying the satisfaction she found in seeing progress. "Today, Mason," she said, her voice calm but authoritative, "you will demonstrate the culmination of your training. The exercise is comprehensive, designed to test not just your technical skills but your judgment, your leadership, and your ability to inspire confidence in others. Consider this the final measure of the lessons you have learned." Mason's heart pounded in his chest, but the fear that had gripped him during earlier tests was replaced by determination. He had faced challenges, embarrassment, and even doubt, but each obstacle had forged a stronger, more disciplined version of himself. He nodded, feeling a quiet confidence he had never known in the days before his reckoning with the Rear Admiral. The exercise began with a simulated emergency aboard a docked vessel. A fire had broken out in one section of the ship, while a mechanical failure occurred in another, requiring immediate response. Mason was tasked with leading a small team of recruits to stabilize the situation, secure the crew, and prevent further escalation. As the chaos unfolded, Mason's mind remained clear. He directed his team with calm authority, issuing precise instructions and correcting mistakes with patience rather than irritation. Each action was deliberate, each command measured, reflecting the lessons Elena had imparted through weeks of disciplined training. A recruit struggled with a hose, water spraying unevenly and threatening to exacerbate the fire. Mason stepped forward, guiding the hands of the young sailor, adjusting the nozzle, and demonstrating the correct technique. "Steady," he instructed. "Focus on control, not speed. Remember what we practiced." The fire continued to spread, smoke curling around them, but Mason's team followed his lead with confidence, inspired by his calm demeanor. Where once he might have panicked or allowed frustration to dictate his actions, he now operated with composure and precision, instilling the same qualities in those around him. As the simulated crisis progressed, Mason's leadership was put to an even greater test. A mechanical failure caused a hatch to jam, trapping one of the recruits inside a compartment. Panic flared momentarily in the team, but Mason remained the anchor. He assessed the situation, delegated tasks efficiently, and coordinated efforts to free the trapped recruit while continuing to manage the fire scenario. By the time the exercise concluded, the situation had been resolved with remarkable efficiency. The recruit stood at attention, sweat-drenched and exhausted, yet brimming with pride and trust in Mason's leadership. He felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, not the shallow thrill of a joke or prank, but the profound fulfillment of having guided others successfully under pressure. Elena Brooks approached, her expression calm but assessing. She scanned the scene, noting the precision of the work, the confidence in Mason's commands, and the discipline reflected in the team's movements. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. "Private Mason," she began, her gaze locking with his, "today you have demonstrated the essence of leadership. You have applied the lessons of discipline, patience, and accountability. You have transformed not only your own behavior, but have inspired confidence and competence in others. This is the mark of a sailor who has truly earned respect." Mason felt a wave of emotion rise within him, pride tempered by humility. He understood that this acknowledgement was not a reward for a single action, but recognition of consistent effort, reflection, and growth. The embarrassment of the milk incident, the long hours of training, the patient guidance of Elena Brooks, all had led to this moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Thank you, ma'am. I understand, and I will continue to apply what I've learned." Elena nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Good. Remember, Mason, the lessons of leadership extend beyond drills, emergencies, and formal exercises. They apply to every choice you make, every interaction you have, and every challenge you face. Respect is not granted through rank alone. It is earned through integrity, diligence, and the willingness to face your mistakes and grow from them." As Mason returned to his quarters, the courtyard buzzing quietly with the aftermath of the exercise, he reflected on his journey. He remembered the moment he had carelessly splashed hot milk on Rear Admiral Brooks, the embarrassment and regret that had followed, and the realization that respect was something far deeper than superficial gestures. That moment, which had seemed trivial and humorous at the time, had become the catalyst for a transformation that would shape his career, character, and outlook on life. His peers approached him with quiet congratulations, recognizing the change that had taken place. Where once he had been a source of jokes and mischief, he now commanded respect through composure, competence, and empathy. He smiled, a mixture of humility and pride, understanding that true leadership was measured not by how others feared or admired you, but by the integrity, patience, and guidance you consistently provided. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the docks and ships, Mason watched Rear Admiral Brooks overseeing the base with her customary calm authority. He felt a deep gratitude for her guidance, not just as a superior officer, but as a mentor who had shown him the path from impulsive youth to disciplined sailor. He realized that the base itself had changed in subtle but profound ways. The culture of careless humor had been tempered by an understanding of accountability. Soldiers moved with more awareness, respecting the standards set before them, inspired by the example of both Mason's growth and Elena's quiet, unwavering leadership. As the evening settled over the base, Mason stood at the edge of the dock, gazing at the glinting ships and calm waters. The transformation that had begun with a simple prank, a splash of hot milk, had come full circle. What once was a moment of embarrassment had become a lesson in humility, patience, and respect. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool sea air fill his lungs. The path ahead was still long, filled with challenges, responsibilities, and opportunities for further growth. But for the first time, Mason felt ready to face it all with clarity, composure, and confidence. He understood that leadership was not about the avoidance of mistakes, nor the illusions of superiority, but about learning, reflecting, and inspiring others to do the same. Rear Admiral Brooks approached silently, her steps deliberate and measured. She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than authority. "You have done well, Mason," she said softly. "Continue on this path. Remember the lessons you have learned, and lead with integrity. That is the true measure of a sailor, and the truest way to earn respect." Mason nodded, understanding that this was more than praise. It was a charge, a responsibility, and a promise to himself. The journey from careless prankster to disciplined sailor had been arduous, humbling, and enlightening, and he embraced it fully, knowing that he had finally earned the respect of both his mentor and himself. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, casting the base in a serene twilight, Mason looked out over the calm waters, feeling the weight and meaning of the lessons he had learned. The prank that had sparked embarrassment, reflection, and transformation had ultimately led to growth, resilience, and the understanding of what it truly meant to serve with honor. In that quiet moment, Mason knew one thing for certain. Respect was earned not through fear, humor, or shortcuts, but through discipline, accountability, and the courage to face oneself honestly. And he would carry that lesson forward for the rest of his life.